Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to show you how we can take a daytime image and turn it to an approximation of nighttime using a few cool filters inside of GIMP. So this is our starting image, and our end result is going to be roughly akin to this. You can also do a little bit further adjusting if you want to get it a little bit more perfect or a little bit more realistic, but that's roughly what we're shooting for here. So in order to make sure we can go back steps in a new image document with the photo already added in as the first layer, I'm going to right click on the layer for the image and I'm going to duplicate that. And I'm going to do that every time I apply a new step here. So the first effect I added on was brightness, decreasing the brightness in the layer. So in this layer now, renamed to brightness, I'm going to go to colors, brightness and contrast. And we want to lower this down a lot because obviously nighttime is darker than day. So about -79 seems okay as a starting place for this image. We can always adjust this as things go on. But for right now, I'll hit OK. And now I'm going to right click that layer and duplicate it again. So the next effect is hue. So we're going to be basically changing the colors inside of the photo. So the next effect we'll apply here is color balance, and here we'll be able to control the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. The midtones are basically going to be what you see in the center of the image. The shadows are going to be the dark areas in the background, and the highlights are the most visible areas of our image. So the first thing we're going to want to adjust is the highlights, which in this case are actually going to target the background areas, the sky essentially, and we want to remove a lot of the red there. So I'm going to take the red cyan and move that way over to the left to make it more a cyan color. And in magenta green, I'm also going to move that more towards a purple. Yellow to blue, we can adjust a little bit over towards blue as well. So our overall color falls somewhere in the blue-purple range. With shadows, we can adjust this a little bit as well. So I'll move it just a tad over towards cyan, a bit towards green, and a bit towards blue. But we do want to be careful not to go too overboard with that. We'll leave the midtones alone, since if you do change that, it would give you a very ridiculous look, and we do want to preserve some of the natural color there. So for now, we'll hit OK, and duplicate the layer one more time. So I'm going to go up to Colors, Hue Saturation, and with Master Color, which is selected by default, I'm going to lower the saturation of color in this image, and we might also want to lower down the lightness. As far as hue goes, you might be able to get a slightly better result if you adjust this bit, so play around with it a little bit. For the hue, I think I'm going to change that a little bit over here to the right. Not too much, though. That looks pretty good at about 10. It'll vary depending on your exact image, how you want to change the color. But generally, the color you're going to be going for is desaturated, a lot more of a natural dark tone as well, nothing too flash. So I'll go ahead and hit OK there. And I will duplicate the layer one more time. And next we'll do curves, which is going to allow us to control some of this darkness here. So by raising and lowering the curve, we can get some pretty interesting results. Obviously, we want the curves to be kind of targeted towards the bottom right-hand corner, but we want to focus on making the sky darker much more so than making the trees darker. So in order to achieve that, the sky colors lay somewhere over here on the right. So I'm going to take this center point and kind of lower it down. Then we can drop the middle as well to make it a little bit darker. Overall, that's not too bad. I do want the sky to be a bit darker, though. So let me see if I can get a slightly better result. I'm also going to drag this other point a bit further to the right to make sure that the sky doesn't have too much color there. And honestly, that's looking pretty good now. So I think that's about what we want. Actually, if you compare it to the original I had, this one is considerably better, so we're going to go with that. So the four filters we applied in the end: brightness, color balance, saturation, and curves. So I hope you guys were able to follow along. Obviously, with your exact image, the different values are going to vary a little bit to get it right. But hopefully you guys are able to get a good result. And I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how we can turn any object, shape, or person into a black silhouette representation of the original. So in order to do this, I'm basically going to trace around this horse here using the path tool, and then we will make a selection from that and turn it black. So the paths tool can be selected over there in the tools window, and we want to zoom in really far. Basically, it's not going to be essential that we get totally precise on this, but the better you trace around the points here, the better your results are going to be overall. So whenever you run into a curved part with the Paths tool, you can just press and hold in order to get a curved shape rather than a straight line. So just keep that in mind whenever you're doing a complicated shape like a person or an animal. If you need to adjust any of the handles, just click on the part where you did create handles by left-clicking pressing. And essentially, we just need to go around the whole shape here. And to adjust it until our outline of the horse looks essentially like the original, but just the outline of it. So for the rest of this, I'm just going to go ahead and speed it up, and you'll be able to see the result once I've gone ahead and made my selection. Okay, so right here, I just want to interject something. I forgot to actually get the tail here. So we can actually work with that still by moving this point out and adding in new points with Control left click in between. So we just have to essentially adjust this curve again and add more points in until it covers the tail as well. Okay, so in real time, it took quite a... I'm going to use the color black at 100% opacity for a black silhouette. And now, if we move this around, and now we have a black silhouette of the horse. Now, if you notice any flaws here, you can always go back and make some changes. So I will hide this layer for right now, and you can select this path then. Show it by clicking on the symbol over here. And let's see, so it looks like this should have been a little bit farther over. And some images it can be a little hard to tell. So all we need to do now is take the Paths tool, click on the paths, and make changes as we see fit. So I might move this over there, this point also to the left. And keep going until we have the right shape. So now, if we want to recreate that again into a new silhouette, we just right click on the path. Go Path to Selection, create a new layer, and fill it in with the Paint Bucket tool. And so we have our slightly revised silhouette of the horse, which we can take and pretty much do whatever we want with. So if you wanted, you could exploit this one layer as an image, crop it out, hide everything else if you choose. Really up to you what you want to do from that point. So that's how you create a silhouette inside of GIMP by tracing around any image or photo. I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how you can take an image and put it inside the bounds of text, as you see here, inside of GIMP. So the first thing we're going to do here is go to File, New, and create a new image document. It can be whatever size you want. And with this new document, what we're going to want to do is drag an image from our computer into GIMP. So I'm just going to drag this straight onto our new GIMP document. And we're going to have this image to work with. For now, I'm going to disable the visibility of it in the Layers panel by clicking on the eyeball over here. And we're going to create text for that image to conform to. So here I already have my font and size set up. Babus Nue 800 font size, sorry, that's different than pixels. Which will allow us to type in something like this. If I center this text, it's still a little bit big, so I'm actually going to take this text and lower it down to 600. And let's reposition it where we want the text to basically be. So now with this text layer, what we want to do is right-click it and do Alpha to Selection. What that's going to do is wherever there's text, it's going to draw a selection around the text elements. So what we can do with that selection is go onto this image layer, right-click it, and add a layer mask. Make sure it's initialized layer mask to lack full transparency, which means it's going to start completely invisible. But if we click on the layer mask now, and with the selection from the text, we use the bucket fill tool, we can simply take a white bucket fill, paste over this selection area, and what's going to happen is the layer mask is now going to perfectly conform to the text we already created. So now when we disable this text layer or move it below the image and enable the image layer, we're going to have the image showing through only on the areas where that text conforms to. Now, to get the same effect I had at the beginning, we can also add on a stroke as an extra. Technically we're done, but if we want that stroke, we can right-click on the image layer, go to Mask to Selection, if it's not already selected. And I would recommend actually doing this on a new layer, so I'm going to add a new layer here. And with the selection still there, right-click, go to Edit, Stroke Selection, and stroke it with whatever color you want. That's going to be a foreground color selected over here in the toolbox, and the line width you want. I'm going to do 12 pixels here, stroke it, and you get a white border on all of the text. So that's how you take an image and have it conform to text within GIMP. I hope you guys found this video useful and interesting, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to draw straight lines and to use guides within Photoshop. So in order to draw a straight line whenever you have a pencil tool or a brush tool selected over here on the left, normally you draw and it's kind of freehand. But if you have that tool selected and you hold Shift down while you're drawing with either your tablet or your mouse, it's going to give you a perfectly straight line in the direction you start in. So we can do the same thing starting from the left and going over to the right, getting a perfectly straight line there. And if we switch over to the pencil tool, we can get the same kind of results. Now that's all well and good if you need to approximate where that line's going to go. But if you need absolute precision, like if you're doing web design, then you should probably have guides set up. So in order to add guides, which we can snap to whenever we use the brush or the pencil tool, we go up to the View menu at the top, and we choose New Guide from the bottom. You can also click the drop down and go to New Guide Layout if you want to have a set of guides for a specific purpose. And you can save these guide layouts as presets, and you can also load them up from other places. So that is a really quick way to get started if you need a specific setup. But if you just want to add a single guide, we choose View and New Guide from the drop-down menu. You can choose either horizontal or vertical. Now by default, this guide is going to be in inches because that's also what our ruler, which is currently invisible, is set to. So if we want to change that, we can show the ruler by hitting Ctrl-R or using the View menu. We can right-click on the ruler and change it over to pixels instead of inches. Now if we go back into the new guide layout, it's going to give us the position in terms of pixels. And if we know how many pixels are in our document, so here it's 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels low, we can just do some simple math in order to, say, get it in the center of the document. So 1/2 of 1920 is going to be 960 pixels. And if I hit OK here, we have a vertical line going top to bottom, but it's moved over 960 pixels, creating us a perfect guideline that's halfway across the document. So we can do the same thing as well with horizontal guidelines. So 1080 divided by 2 is going to be 540 pixels. So there we get a horizontal line. Now you might notice these guidelines we've created are at the center of the document, which means that by default, if you're moving layers or images around, you can already snap to those inside of Photoshop, but you can't actually snap a brush or pencil stroke without having these guidelines. So now that we have these guidelines, we can snap to the guidelines if we enable it. So in order to enable guide snapping, we go to View, Snap to, Guides, but it looks like it's already enabled here, so we don't need to worry about that here. And now if we use a white color with the pencil tool and drag across, it's going to automatically snap here. So note that I'm not holding the Shift button down at all. Now to show a comparison, I'll just try to draw a straight line freehand with the mouse. And let's go down a little bit. And you can see, whoops, you can see that you're going to run into some issues if you don't have any snapping enabled. So once again, we'll try to draw a straight line on this vertical guideline. Note that my mouse is wavering a bit, but overall it's still doing a pretty good job there. We can use the eraser tool to fix any minor mistakes we might make though. Here I'll just erase that bit, and we'll continue drawing with the pencil tool. And there you go. Now, of course, you can create the guidelines at any point you want, so it doesn't need to be any particular multiple of the base document size. You could just do 250 pixels. And start drawing down that again. Probably easier to do this with a drawing tablet, by the way, than a mouse, but that's what I'm working with right now. And as you can see, the guidelines will go a long way in helping you to draw straight, but also you can snap images to these guidelines. So if you needed to frame an image that you bring in perfectly within your document, maybe for web design, then these guidelines will really help you out a lot. So that's the basics of using guidelines and drawing straight lines inside of Photoshop CC 2018. So I hope this video has helped you out. I've been Chris, and I will see you guys in my future Photoshop content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to quickly show you guys how you can stroke or outline text inside of GIMP. So here I've already gone ahead and added in an image, added in text. So what you do from this point is you right click on the text layer, you go down to Alpha 2 Selection, which is going to give you this border around all of your text elements. So what we can do with that now is create a new layer. So in the layer panel, hit create a new layer here. You can probably just use the defaults there, transparency, layer fill type. And now we right click on the screen, go to edit, and stroke selection is going to be down here at the bottom. Now when we pop open this panel, it's going to give you stroke line, solid color, or you can do a pattern. In most cases you probably want solid color. You can increase the line width if you want it to be larger than normal. And the color is going to be whatever you have the color set over here as the foreground color inside of GIMP. You can also see with line style, you get some extra options for controlling how it will look as a border around all of your text. But like I said, in most cases, you're just going to want solid color, line width. So here I'm going to boost the line width to 12 pixels because I think that this text is really large actually. So it probably needs a larger line width. And then we'll go ahead and stroke it. So with that done, we now have a black outline around all of our text. Keep in mind that if you increase the stroke size too much, it may give you a few issues like here on this and sign. You can see how the stroke's kind of caving in there. Maybe 12 pixels is a little bit much. Once again, it does vary depending on what your text size is. Just to demo one more time with a different option, I'll do Alpha to Selection and a new layer. And here we'll do a dashed line instead of a solid line. So edit, stroke selection, and maybe I'll set it to 10 pixels here. And in under line style, we will choose a dash preset, and let's do medium dashes. So we'll stroke it, and now instead of a solid stroke all the way around, we get these dashes. It looks a little weird, and that's probably why in most cases you're just going to want to go for a solid stroke, but hopefully that gives you an idea of a couple ways you can stroke your text or outline it inside of GIMP. Thanks for watching. I've been Chris, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to write text bound in a circular fashion inside of GIMP using paths. So in order to do this, we need to start with the ellipse select tool to create the circle, which is later going to be converted into a path, which is going to define how our text is written as we convert this onto a path. So first off, use the ellipse select tool and draw a circle around wherever you want that circle to be. It doesn't need to be a perfectly circle shape unless you want it to be. It could also be an oval or whatever. The important thing is we get the right selection that you want. So here I'm going to draw this circle roughly around the outer edges of this football. I might bring this side in a bit to make it a little bit more even on all sides. And when you're satisfied with your selection, we can convert this into a path. So to do that, we go over to the Paths panel, and if you don't see this on the right, you can always open panels by going to Windows, Dockable Dialogues, and Paths, or whichever other window you need to open. And inside the Paths panel, we right-click, we go to Selection to Path, which is going to take this circle selection and it's going to convert it into a path immediately. Now we need text inside of our document. I've already gone ahead and created one using the text tool. So the only thing I really want to note here about the text tool is that if you create a new line character, so right here you see how it goes to a new line because I hit the enter key as doing such. Whenever you have the enter key pressed and you have a new line, if you assign it to a path, whenever it finds that enter key, it's going to start from the beginning of the path and it's going to go again. So in this case, because I have 4 lines, it's actually going to create 4 lines of text going as far around this circle as it can. And then it goes to the next line of text and creates another wave around the circle, and so on and so forth. So if you don't want that effect, then make sure there's no new line characters inside of your text and it's just one long run-on line. So once you've defined your text, including the font size, what we need to do here now is right-click on the text layer and choose text along path. Make sure that in paths, though, you do have the circle selection path selected because that's what it's going to basically be assigned to. So text along path is going to take this text and try to put it around the circle. 4 lines here, and you can see that the lines are cut evenly, so half will go below and half will go above. But all that gets created here is a path. So this isn't actually text yet, but it is the base for what we'll create our visible text from. So next we need to go to paths, make sure we have the new path selected, the one created from the actual text. And then we go to layers, create a new layer here. So I'm going to make it a transparent layer, same size as our image. And back in paths, I'm going to right click on the text path, choose path to selection. And that's going to take all this space inside here and make it selectable by us. So now with this selection made, we go to the paint bucket tool, zoom in, we find one of these selection areas, any one of them will do, and we use the paint bucket to fill in all of these letters simultaneously. If we zoom out a bit, we'll see that our text should be visible. But to really show it, what we can do is we can hide the path and the paths window. So if we hide that, the red disappears, and what we're left with is the actual text that will show on our image. Now I will note, using this technique, the text does look a little bit smaller than it was originally written. So what I would suggest is make your text a little bit oversized here so that when you actually go and fill it in, it'll be the size you actually want. And now to clean up, we can hide our original text layer or delete it if you want. And we're pretty much done. So we have text going around the soccer ball now. And that's how you add text in a circle inside of GIMP. So I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how in GIMP we can Photoshop a person behind an object inside of a scene. So basically what's going on in this trick is that this tree trunk here is on a separate layer from the rest of the image, although it was originally on the same image. And then in between those 2 layers, we actually have this boy standing there, giving the illusion that this boy is in fact standing behind the tree, but in front of the background of the scene. So let's move over to a new document so that we can recreate this effect. Here you'll notice that I brought in 2 images. The first is the tree background, and the second is this image that has this boy and this girl. So this time, just for fun, I'll take the girl out of this image and put it inside of the tree background. So a good way to select this person and move it to the other image is going to be the Paths tool, because we can just create a bunch of points that we can select the person from. This is a very complicated shape, so the Paths tool will work well here. So what I'm going to do is use the Paths tool, and I'm just going to create a lot of points while zoomed in around the girl's body. So I'll click over here to start with my first point, and just keep going around. You can click and hold if you want to do curves instead of just straight lines. But for a rough approximation of pulling this person into the other image, this should work pretty well. I mean, in the end, we're going to be scaling it down a lot anyway, so you won't really be able to tell that much. So the idea here is just go around the entire outline of the girl or the boy's body, or whoever you happen to be moving to the other image. So I will just speed up the rest of this part so you don't have to watch. It's basically the same process. So now I have a selection that goes all around the girl's body. You can see that there's a little gap in here that we'll take care of, but I'll worry about that a bit later, if we need to at all. So for now, what I'm going to do is go over to the Paths window, right-click the path, and do Path to Selection, so that we can, in the layer, select the girl's body. Control X to cut it out. And then I'm going to create a new layer so that we can separate this from the original image. So pasting that in, left-click. And then, because it's a pasted layer, I'm going to right-click and do 2 new layers so that it's permanently posted in. I'm going to hide the original image we got the child from, and we could delete that or just leave it alone for now. But we want to re-enable the tree scene. So now what we're going to want to do is figure out where in the image we can put this girl. So I think what we'll do is we'll move her behind this tree here. And to do that, first we want to scale her way down. So using the scale tool, I'm going to hold Control so that it has equal ratio on top to bottom and left to right. Scale her way lower so that her size is actually proportional to the tree. And we'll move that image of her over there a bit. Probably need to scale her down further, but I think that's kind of a rough idea. So let's scale a bit more. So let's try that. Doesn't look too bad. Probably still a bit big. In fact, definitely. Can go even lower than that in this image. And now in order to actually get her to show behind the tree, what we're going to need to do is first off hide the girl in her pasted layer. And now we need to take this tree trunk area and move it to a separate layer. So I'm going to use the Paths tool again, and I'm going to create a path for this tree trunk area. Anywhere basically that the girl should be showing in front of, we need to separate onto this extra layer here. So it doesn't need to get the entire tree, just the areas where it actually counts. So with that path selection, I'm going to right-click Path to Selection, and we're going to create yet another new layer here. So this layer should go above the girl, and what we're going to do is Control X to cut that selection out of the tree area. Remember, Path to Selection, so that you can actually get the right selection. And then in layer 1, or whatever your new layer is called, I'm going to Control V to paste it back in. And now, if we take the girl and show her, she should appear once again. So now we have a few problems. 1, the girl's too big. Number 2, the part we cut out from the tree wasn't large enough, so the shoe's actually showing through. But once we shrink her, that won't be an issue. And then thirdly, her color is way off from the actual image, so we'll need to do a color adjustment in a minute here. So I'm going to get started by lowering her size down first. And because the tree layer is actually covering that lower body portion now, we don't have to worry about pasting more onto layer 1 up here, the in front layer of the tree. So we'll just go straight to adjusting the color. So in order to adjust this person's color, first I want to create a duplicate layer so that if we ever want to go back to this point, we can do that easily. So I'm going to right-click and do Duplicate Layer. I'll hide the original layer so that we're only editing this copy. I'll go to Colors, and we'll start with Brightness and Contrast. So we can darken her a bit, increase the contrast to make her come into the scene a bit more. And honestly, that might be enough for what your purposes are. If you need to do other layer adjustments, you can go up to the Colors menu and mess around with it a little bit. That actually looks pretty good. So what I'll also do is take the boy from the previous image and copy and paste him in. So new layer here, and I'll paste him over here. So once again, with the tree layer, the original tree image, we'll cut a portion out so that this lower half of the body is hiding again. So I will hide the boy for temporary purposes and do another path selection so that we can hide the boy's body from the image. If you need to edit at any point, just click on it and drag it a bit until you get it perfect. And make sure you connect the last 2 points at the end. So here I'll do a path to selection. I will cut that selection out of the tree image and post it into layer 1. Now we can show the boy, and he'll be there as well. And there you go. 2 people spliced into another image behind objects in the scene, giving the illusion that both of those children are actually part of the original image. So I've been Chris, that's going to be it for this GIMP tutorial. I hope you guys found it useful and interesting, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how we can take text and stick it onto a custom path defined with the Paths tool inside of GIMP. So once you have your text created, at least at a basic level, go ahead and select the Paths tool. And what we're going to be doing here is creating a series of points. In my case, I'm going to be trying to take this text and put it below the shadows over here so that it kind of curves around with the landscape horizon. But using the Paths tool, you can pretty much make any shape you want to. So for me, I'm going to zoom in here, and we're going to start on the left and create a curved line going to the right. Now, with the Paths tool, you can create straight lines and you can create curved lines. So if you want a straight line, do not hold anything down, just left-click a bunch of points, and it'll create straight lines between all the path points you create. However, if you want those points to be curved, what you do is you click and hold left mouse button down, and then it's going to give you these handles which create Bezier curves, allowing you to curve basically the left side of that point and the right side of that point as well. So if I go and create a straight line over here, it's actually going to curve downwards over here on the left and curve upwards on the right. We can take this third point and also have extra control over it, so you can combine the curves to get it to look exactly how you want. I would point out that with large text like this, you do want to be very gentle on the amount of curving because these characters do need to stand up straight. So if you try to curve too much with large text, you're going to run into some issues when you actually convert it to the path, this text to the path. So let's just go ahead and create these points here. So for the first point, I won't really curve it, and then maybe I'll curve it down just a bit. And I'll actually move this point all the way up here, seems fine. And create another point over here. The Bezier curve from the first one kind of still determines how this is going to look, so more or less fine. And we'll just keep going, maybe downwards a bit. Or actually, with this point, I'm going to redo that. I do want that to have a bit of a curve as well. So just really light on the handles here. Then we'll move this over, go down a little bit, and this can pretty much go all the way over to the end over here. Now with this path, we can adjust the points by left-clicking on them just a bit until we get pretty much what we're looking for here. I might actually want to move all of this text down so that the text is only showing in the black area. So I'm just going to bring these points down a little bit more to make sure that the text is hopefully showing on the black area alone. But this is kind of where we'll have to test it out a bit. So we have our path. And now with the path selected in the Paths window, if you don't see the Paths window, go up to Windows, Dockable Dialogs, and open up Paths. Make sure it's selected there. Go back over to your Layers window. Right-click on the text, assuming you have already previously defined it. Right-click it, go to Text Along Path, and that's going to take the text and try to put it along the path. So our text element is actually not needed anymore, so we can hide that in the Layers panel. And what putting the text along the path did was basically create a separate path here where we can select this and fill it in. Now because it's showing all the path points right now, we can either click off the path in order to see more what it looks like, or we can just zoom in to get more fine detail on everything on the path. So I'm noticing for this H over here that there's an issue like I was talking about earlier with large text. You can't curve very much, which is a downside. So in order to get this looking right, we can actually delete this, go back to this other path that's already been created. And with the Paths tool, we can edit it a little bit more. So maybe with these handles, I'm going to just adjust that. Also, I noticed that the text is showing a little bit above the line where we want it to be. It's actually showing where the stars are at. So I want to bring all of this down. It's just a thing we've got to do a little bit of trial and error. And let's just repeat process, try that again. So I'm going to right click the text along path. We'll see how that goes. The H looks a little bit better now. Not exactly perfect, but we might be able to work with that. So if you're satisfied with how the outline of the text looks, go into the Paths window, right-click the path, and do Path to Selection. That's going to create a selection border around all of these character outlines. And what we need to do now is go to the Layers panel, create a new layer, and fill it in with the paint bucket. So we just need to fill one of these in, and it will fill all of the characters in because we have it all selected at once. So paint bucket, I'm going to do white color, fill it in, and then we have text along a path. So we can hide the paths now so that we can see exactly what it looks like. So I'm going to fix this up real quick, going back and redoing this path creation step. I just want to take these points and move them a little bit further down. And now we can recreate the text one more time, so make sure you have the right path selected. I'm going to delete that old one. So when you're ready, right-click the text again and do text along path. And that's looking pretty good this time. So I'm going to hide this old path. I'm going to right-click the new path. I'm going to do path to selection and fill it in with the paint bucket tool. Oh, we need a new layer, of course. So new layer, fill it in with the paint bucket. And there we go. We have text that we can manipulate. So for instance, if we wanted to do an outline now, we would just select this off to selection. We could right-click, edit, stroke path, and change the color there to something like red. Stroke it, and then there you go. So that's going to be it for this video on how you port text along a path inside of GIMP. I've been Chris. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how to create and add shapes inside of GIMP. So if you've ever seen Photoshop and you wanted to use the tools that they have to basically stamp in shapes, that's actually not available in GIMP, unfortunately. However, I have two really good alternatives to that you can use as a substitute. So first off, the Paths tool is really good for creating hard-edged shapes, because you basically just create a series of points with the Path tool, and then you can easily fill that in with any shape you want. So for instance, if I click here to add a point, click down here to add another point, and maybe we want to create a trapezoid, so I'll create another point down here, and a point up there, and finally connect that last point to the first point by hitting Control-Click. We've basically created ourselves a rough trapezoid shape. Now, we can adjust the points by clicking on a point and dragging it out until we get it looking basically how we want it to look. And once we have that shape created, we can go over to the Paths window over here, right-click it, and choose Path to Selection. Once we have that selection made, we go to a new layer, and we fill that in with the Paint Bucket tool. So you see the selection, we fill that in here. I'm going to make it orange just for kicks. That's how you would create a basic shape using the Path tool. Now, of course, unfortunately, you're going to be prone to human error if you do it like this, and you don't spend a tremendous amount of time making it perfect. So as an alternative, you can actually just go onto any search engine like Google or DuckDuckGo and grab any shape you want. So if you want, you can just put in sun-shaped PNG or trapezoid-shaped PNG or star-shaped PNG, whatever you're looking for. You'll get so many results you can almost certainly find what you're looking for. And the reason we make it a PNG is PNG images, if you don't know already, can support transparency. So if we click on some of these and actually open them up, what you'll notice is that there is this checkered background, and that means that that area is transparent. So if we were actually to save this image to our computer, like I've already done, and drag it into GIMP, the white area that would normally be there in a JPEG image is going to be made transparent. So the only thing we're actually bringing in is the color of the shape itself. So now, with a shape inside of GIMP, we can just put it wherever we want, change to a fill bucket tool and make it white if we want, just by filling in those solid colors. So once we've brought a shape in from the internet as a PNG, we can just manipulate it, change its size, whatever we need to do inside of GIMP, and put it in your GIMP images. So that's going to be it on this quick tutorial on how to create and add shapes inside of GIMP. I hope you found it useful. I've been Chris, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how you can take clothing on a person inside of GIMP and make it transparent. So to get things started, I've brought in two separate images. It's important that the image of the person is separated from the background, because in order for the transparency effect to work, there actually has to be some image data behind it. So in other words, we need a background behind this person so that when it's transparent, you actually see something. So the first thing that we have to do is to make a selection of the part of the clothing we want to make transparent. And the best way to get an initial selection is going to be using the freehand select tool. In Photoshop, this would be called the lasso. And the reason we need this is that ultimately we want to select by color to get precise results. But we need to cut away some of this gray area, because if we just color by select on this gray, the pants will be included too. We don't want that, so we need to make a selection where we isolate the top suit from the bottom pants. So I'm going to make some pin-like selections here by just going a rough border around the person's suit, trying to cut away the bottom part, the pants. Now once we get past the initial gray area, we can be a little sloppier. We don't need to worry too much about these other colors over here. They're not going to be selected when we do a color by selection. So I can just kind of go around here and make some very rough cuts. Now with areas like this, the person's vest, maybe we want to be a little bit precise here because there are some grayish areas there. And we can be rough again, get up here to the neck collar. And I'm going to be a little bit precise on this. Doesn't need to be perfect, though. And then past that, since it's just reds over here, we can be rough once again. And we just want to keep going all the way around until we get a rough selection of that person's suit. So I'm going to Control X now and put it on a new layer. So to create a new layer, you click New Layer in the Layers window. And I'm going to paste the suit back on exactly how we selected it. Now we don't have a perfect selection yet. We need to do select by color and just grab the gray from the suit. So in order to do that, you choose the select by color tool and bump the threshold high enough that it can select these light grays as well as the dark grays and the near black colors and the crevices. So I'm going to select here, and in this case, because I kind of already did this, I have a really good selection over here. So 128 is the threshold I needed here. If you put it down too little, you won't get the full suit. And if you bump it up too high, you'll get things selected that don't really belong. So in that case, 128 is about where we want it. Now we need to separate this on to a new layer once again. So I'm going to Control X, new layer, post it on. And now that we have this suit pretty much perfectly selected, the last thing we need to do is to right-click on the layer, add Layer Mask, and choose Grayscale Copy of the layer. So when we do that, based on how light or dark the color was initially, it's going to make it partially transparent or completely transparent. So by doing that, we get a really nice effect where we can see parts of the suit a little better than others, but overall, it's quite transparent as we look through it and see the background and the nature image behind. So that's essentially how you add transparency to clothing or any other object inside of GIMP. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I've been Chris, and I will see you guys in my future GIMP content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how we can change the background on an image. So we're going to be starting with this Valentine's photo and changing the background into this theme over here that we see here. The difference is that I'm going to change the background directly in this photo rather than cutting the character out of the dugout and popping it into this photo of heaven and hell. So in this photo, what we have to do first is separate the dark from the background. So the best way we can do that is with the Scissors Select tool, which is going to intelligently detect an object and create a wavy border around it to get a very close approximation of the shape we're trying to cut out. So if I use the Scissors Select tool, and I go click here for a starting point, we're going to end up with a dot. And if I click again, we're going to have another point. And you'll notice how, if we zoom in really close, that this connection between the 2 points is not a linear point-to-point connection. There's a lot of waves in between. It tries to find the areas where the color is different, the blue sky in the background, and contrast that with the white fluff down below. So it's going to separate those two. And as we add more points, it's going to basically automatically find the edge of where the dog is at and get a pretty good approximation of the dog's fur separated from the background. Now, if you run into places like this where a little bit of the fur is getting cut off, you can add in an extra point here, and you can just keep adding extra points by left-clicking on the line that already exists. And that's going to allow it to kind of adjust and try to more precisely get a border around the dog's fur. So we just keep going down with this, really, until we get to the flower, and then it'll become a little bit more tricky. I'm not going to worry too much about every single little hair, because it has a very minor impact on the overall photo. So we'll just worry a little bit more when we get down here to the flower. Now, the flower obviously contrasts with the background, so the scissors select tool is still going to work for us. But there are more intricacies here to this flower, so we'll need to be careful, maybe add a few more points in to make sure it can accurately cut around the shape of the flower. And if you ever need to move a point because you put it in the wrong spot, you can just click on an already existing point and drag it while you press and hold the left mouse button down. So as you can see, the scissors select tool, it's really, really powerful. A great tool for jobs like this where you just want to get one color or a set of colors isolated from the background. And it takes a little while, but the result is worth it. So for the remainder here, I think I will just kind of speed it up until we've gone all the way around the dog and the rose. So as soon as you think you have a good selection made, click on the starting point to connect them. And then if you click inside the bounds of all of those points, it'll automatically take those points and turn it into a selection inside of your layer. So now we have the dog selected, including the rose here, so we can hit Control X, cut it out, and put this into a new layer. Now if we hide the original layer, we now basically have the dog separated from the background. So now we can pop in a new background. So what I'll do here is add this stairs file into the document as a new layer, and that will serve as the new background. So in this case, the image of the background isn't quite big enough, so I will scale it up a bit, holding down the Control key in order to make sure the ratio stays the same. And I'll reposition it where I want it on the image. We'll worry about cropping off the top a little later. Now, one problem you're going to run into in situations like this where your new background is very different in its color scheme than the original image. You can see that the dog still has some of the original blue sky around its fur. So we can adjust that so that it's more closely resembling the actual background here by doing a hue color adjustment. So if we go up to the colors menu on the dog layer and go into hue saturation, we can take each of these colors, namely in this case magenta, blue, and cyan, and adjust those more towards red. Because if you look at the lighting going on here, it's some white up in the sky by heaven, and then in the pit of lava below, you've got a lot of reds and oranges. So we want to take this blue and shift it more towards red. So I'm going to take each of these individual colors, magenta, blue, cyan. I'm going to adjust the hue over to the right, which is going to make it a lot more red. Don't want to overkill it, maybe about 50-60 points is okay. And I'll do the same for each of these colors, so that the color on the dog's fur and the cloud area around is a lot closer to the actual color you would see in the image. Another option we can do is decrease the saturation if we don't want the color to stand out that much. So lowering the saturation down, it's going to remove a lot of the overall color and make it less vibrant. And then with this magenta over here, also lower down the saturation a bit. But that's just a rough approximation. You can play around with it a little bit more. But here I think we'll hit OK for now. And the last thing I'm going to do is just try to kind of clean up these edges a little bit, and I think I will do that with the eraser tool. So any area that seems kind of too sticking out and not very fluffy, I'll just try to kind of smooth it over with the brush tool and make the edges a little less hard. Note that my brush has 50 hardness, not 100%. So it's going to be a little bit soft on the actual decrease of these edges. It'll leave a little bit remaining, and I think overall that'll be a good thing in this case. Okay, so after going around the edges with the brush, it does look a little bit smoother here. Now, because the lighting on top is a lot more white and down below it should be a little bit more lava colored, I'm thinking in this case we could try applying a gradient, so I'm going to go ahead and try that and see if this gives us a little bit cooler of a color. So first I'm going to create a new layer, and now I'm going to make a selection from this layer, and on this new layer I'm going to put a gradient on top of it. So use the color picker, and I'm going to choose the white of the celestial angel area up there. And then on bottom, I want to grab something along the lines of this orange down here. So, with the selection made on this new layer, I'm going to do foreground to background color, and we'll do a gradient, something like this. But I'm going to lower the opacity down a huge amount. But I'll take this layer and I'll put it under the dark, and now I think I'll lower the opacity of the dark's layer by a little bit, and now some of that orange and white is showing through depending on the area. So I think one more thing I want to do is kind of lower the brightness of the dark down a bit, so I will go up to colors and we'll do a brightness contrast change, and I'm going to lower the brightness down. But I think I'm also going to increase the contrast to make it a little bit more standout. I mean, the theme of the overall image is kind of dark, so I think this is kind of cool. So a little bit more contrast, a little bit less brightness, and maybe if we lower the opacity down. I also think that the gradient effect is showing a little bit too much, so I'm going to increase this opacity up here to about 95–96%, so that it only shows through very, very mildly. And now, I think that's not too bad. So, what we'll finally do is crop the image. So I'm going to get rid of that Valentine's Day layer, the original background. And lastly, I'm going to take the new background and I'm going to crop the image to the selection. So here I will do auto crop image. And now we pretty much have it as we want it. Now, you can see one little mistake I made when I was doing this as a select tool at the bottom. I did get part of the dark cut off, but that's okay. We can just take these two layers here and drag them down just a bit. So I'm going to hold Shift and then Control and move it straight down. So 10 pixels, and then this one up here, I'll hold Shift, click, and then Control to drag it down 10 pixels so that they're sitting right on top of each other. And now, finally, to compare it to the original image, here we have the dog with the rose in its mouth and a lovely Valentine's scene. And here we have it with the new background with a few minor color adjustments made. So, I hope that this tutorial has helped you guys learn how to change the background on an image and have the character make a little bit more sense in the context of the background. I've been Chris, thanks for watching this GIMP tutorial, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how we can change the eye color of eyeballs inside of GIMP for either people or animals. So in this case, I'm going to be using the freehand select tool, the free select tool, in order to draw a selection around the eyeballs. Because the black borders are very large, it's going to work fine here. The important thing is that, in general, the colors we're selecting are just the green inside the eyeball, and blacks and whites surrounding it. As long as we try to avoid any other color, like a red, we're going to be just fine and we'll get a good result. So as long as you get a rough shape around the eyeball, it's okay if you have a little bit of black or a little bit of white. And we're going to add to that by holding Shift down to add another addition to the selection, and do the exact same process over here, just clicking around the eyeballs. Make sure you get all the green, or whatever the color is. Once you go around both eyeballs, we're going to have a proper selection. And from there, we want to go up to the Colors menu and choose Hue Saturation. So once we have the Hue Saturation window popped up, we want to stay on Master. And the only thing we have to do now is to adjust the slider for the hue. So it's going to start on green, and we can bring it to the left, which is going to basically go through all the colors of the spectrum. When we get to a hue we like, we simply need to hit OK. So you can see by doing this technique, it's so easy to change it to whatever color you want. And although there is a little bit of a difference between the colors inside the eyeball, because we are selecting all of it at once and changing it all at once, the color keeps matching what was originally there in the eyeball, and we end up with a good result. So I suppose I will leave it over on this orange here, hit OK when we're done, And there we have changed color for the eyeball of an animal, in this case a cat, or people. So that's going to be it for this quick GIMP tutorial. I've been Chris, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how we can clean clothes and remove stains inside of GIMP. So on this white t-shirt there are 4 very obvious stains of different colors and shapes. And in order to remove these, there's 2 really good tools to use for this, which are the clone tool, which is what we'll be primarily using, and then later on the healing tool will be good for cleaning up small areas where there still may be a few issues. So the idea is generally we use the clone tool to copy color and texture from an area which is clean, and then copy that onto an area where it's not clean at all, basically where the stains are, and it will overwrite that. Now there's a couple caveats here. Since we are using the clone tool, it's going to copy it exactly as it is in the source area to the destination area. So that means anything you try to copy, like a crease here, it's going to show up, so you have to be careful. Generally you want to copy from a flat area in order to correct the color on a flat area. So to use the clone tool, we select it from the tools window. You hold Control down, and then you left click in order to set a clone source. So I'm going to set my source over here in this very flat white area, and we can copy that color over to where we have a stain. So just by going like this, we can almost immediately see a vast improvement. Now, I'm intentionally doing this. You notice when the source area goes over the red line there, that gets copied too. So you do have to be careful about exactly what you're copying. Now you don't have to do everywhere from one source. You can maybe grab some from down here and use that to correct the color here. Just try to be careful that you don't make it too obvious that it was cloned here. So one issue you might run into is that over here the shirt color is kind of more of a gray, and then the copied source area is a lot more white. So we could actually undo that, and a better option might be to source from right above here, and then to copy that down, like this. So generally try to just make the color look relatively consistent. And if you can't get it 100%, that's okay. We'll work on that in just a moment. So another tool we have available to us is the blur tool. So in order to make this look a little bit more realistic, we can use the healing tool. And we set an area like over here as the source. And then if we start trying to draw over here, it'll try to correct this white to make it a little bit more of a consistent gray color. So kind of just drawing this down a bit helps smooth out the lines a lot. As an alternative, you could also use blur, which will remove some of those hard edges where it just goes from white to gray immediately and make it more of a transition. But in any case, that stain is pretty much taken care of. We'll worry about the extra red line in a little bit. So for this one, I'm going to definitely source from the bottom right, and we can just kind of draw over this very, very fast. Now, if you have a more complicated piece of clothing, it probably will be a little bit more difficult. You'll have to spend longer on it. It's just pretty simple here because it's a flat white shirt. There's not really too much to say. Just in the end, what we're going for is that the color changes, but with those last little remnants you see here, we try to smooth those out and make it completely consistent. So I'm also going to use the healing brush tool here, sourcing down here where it's white. And I'm just going to kind of brush over those areas where there's still some little bits remaining. Now we can also use the healing brush on smaller areas like this. Well, it kind of worked, but not entirely. So what we could do is actually do the healing brush a second time. Generally, it kind of self-corrects. If you do it enough times, it'll get rid of it. There's still like a little bit of a red tint, so if you really want to be good about it, you can keep going till it's all gone. Just kind of zoom out, make sure that the color is relatively consistent. If not, you can pick a gray spot and use the healing brush to make it a little bit more consistent. You could alternatively just use the clone tool as well. But you can see how that becomes a little less smooth. It's like pretty obvious that you use the clone tool. So using the healing brush in combination with that or blurring it out will probably give you a better result in the end. So let's use the clone tool one more time, and we'll just get rid of this red stripe very easily. Probably need even less healing brush with that, because that's just such a simple change. And for this last stain, we can just use the clone tool again. With this one, we might need to actually use some healing brush or blur. But hopefully by now you kind of get the general idea. So the stains are gone. Now we just need to kind of make the color a little bit more consistent. Another decent option for cleanup might be the smudge tool to kind of smear some of these edges away and make it really hard to notice that they were originally there. But in any case, all of the stains have been removed. It's relatively hard to tell that there were originally stains there. So that's pretty much all there is to cleaning clothing and removing stains inside of GIMP. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. I've been Chris, and I will see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I wanted to show you how we can measure precise distances and angles inside of GIMP. So the tool for measuring distances and angles inside of GIMP is called the Measure tool. You'll find it on the top right hand corner of the tool window. So we can left click it there, but alternatively you can hit Shift M on your keyboard to switch to the tool. So how the Measure tool works is that we left click and then we drag to a second point in order to create a line. And that line will measure a distance by default in pixels, as that's what we generally work with in GIMP. And it will also measure an angle between the starting and ending points. So first off, for measuring distances, if we want to measure a height or a width, then it's a good idea to hold Control down while we click the lines, because that'll make it really easy to snap to a 0 or 90 degree interval. So in order to measure precise horizontal or vertical distances, it's a good idea to hold Control down when you're creating your line, because when you hold Control down, GIMP will automatically snap the angle to 15 degree increments, which will make it really easy to get 0, 90, or 180 degrees and so on to show up. So that will mean if I want to create a perfectly vertical line, it's going to be very easy. So I'm going to left click here. So while we're dragging this line out to the second point, I'm holding Control down so that it can snap very easily to 0 degrees here. So now we know that this line is perfectly straight up. So all we're going to need to do now to measure the diameter of this circle is to zoom in and make sure that this first point is placed directly on the top pixel. So you can see there's a lot of areas with the top pixel. So I can just left click on this point, drag it down 1 pixel, and that's going to give us a perfect height starting point. And now we go down here to the bottom, and we want to move this 1 point down because you can see that on the edges there, there's still 1 more pixel that needs to be accounted for. So by doing that, we can measure a perfect height of 370 pixels. Now, if we needed to adjust these 2 points because they weren't quite at the high point or the low point, we could simply zoom in here, drag this over here to the right, which you can see will create an angle, which is what we don't want. But then we go up to the top point, and while holding Control down, we can just move it again, and you'll see that it will once again snap to 0 degrees. You can see that at the very bottom where we'll say 370 pixels, 0 degree angle. That's how we know that it's a perfectly straight line. So to do the same thing with a horizontal measurement, I can come over here, find the leftmost point, left click, and then zoom out with middle mouse wheel, scroll all the way over to the right hand side. And while holding Control, we just let go over here at the final pixel over here. And you can see a measurement of 370 pixels. Which shows us that this is a perfect circle, because the horizontal measurement and the vertical measurement are exactly the same at 370 pixels, but you could probably tell that just by looking at it. Okay, so let's talk about measuring an angle now. So the trick to getting a good angle measurement with the measurement tool is going to be to zoom in and to make sure that you're following along the edges. So for instance, if I zoom in here on the green part of this Chrome logo, then I'll be able to really easily pick out one of these top pixels, so left clicking, and then I can just drag it down here to another point, which is on the edge of this green space, and that should give us a good measurement for the angle between the starting point and over here. So you can see it's measuring it at a 29.98 degree angle. So we can tell that that was probably meant to be a 30 degree angle, but just because of measuring so few pixels, it's off by a small fraction. If we wanted to double check, we could measure again by left clicking up there at that top right pixel. Maybe we go a little bit further here, so I'll drag it down to here. We can see, depending on the pixel, that it may be off by a little bit. But yeah, that approximately gives us a 30-degree angle. So let's take one more angle measurement here. I'll measure between about here and over here. Keep in mind the slope, so depending on where you stop your measurement, it's going to give you slightly different results. But I'm going to try to only do this long part where there is no curving. So let's see here. A measurement from this pixel seems a little bit more accurate. And we'll go up here, and we get an angle measurement of about 28.61 degrees. So one thing I want to point out about these angles, though, is that they are direction independent. So you can see here it creates the angle, the starting point being here going to the right, and it measures up here. But if I measure from this pixel down to that starting point, we get exactly the same angle measurement, even though the directions are reversed on these angles. One was looking to the right and the other was looking to the left. So you will never really see it measured in terms of a full 360-degree circle where the direction actually matters. So that's the basics of how you can do measuring of angles and distances inside of GIMP using the measure tool. Long story short, use Control to snap to certain angle degrees, 15-degree increments by default, and zoom in a lot so that when you click to select your starting and end points, that you get a pixel-precise answer. So that's going to be it for this GIMP video. Thanks for watching. I've been Chris, and I'll see you guys in my future video content. Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to show you guys how we can do a spiral text inside of GIMP by using the text to path command. And the end result we're going to be shooting for is going to be something like this, where we have text on a record and it's going around and around in a very subtle spiral until it gets to the center area there, and the text basically just writes along that path. So in order to get a relatively accurate spiral, we are going to need to use a special effect inside of GIMP. But the first thing we need to do is set up the requirements for that. What you're going to want to do with your sphere, or wherever you want the spiral, is to hit plus and create a new layer. So in order to create the spiral effect, I'm going to need to first create a box that is split into two different colors. So two rectangles making a full square. And guides are a good way to set this up. So I already have the guides set up at the center and the edges of this record where we're going to be creating the spiral on, but I don't have any at the top. So it would be a good idea now for me to go to Image, Guides, New Guide. We can do it without %, and we'll set its initial position at 50 pixels. Which is actually remarkably close to where we want it. Actually, it's right on the dot. So let's go down here to the bottom. We can, of course, use these pixel measurements to get an idea of where it should be. It looks like 1800 there. So I'm going to go to Guides, New Guide, and try 1800. It's very easy to adjust if we need to. So using the Move tool over here on the left, I'm going to drag this down a little bit more. And now we have guides that we can use to set up even rectangles on both sides. So I'm going to be using Snap to Guide, which is View and then Snap to Guides, so that when I click over here where these guides meet, it will give me exact precision on creating this box. So with the box selected, I want to fill that with a color. So I'm going to fill it with this blue and fill it in with the Paint Bucket tool, and go over here to the right side and do exactly the same thing. So we're going to fill this in with red now. And that's the starting point for where we can apply the whirl effect. So before we apply the effect, we're going to want to make sure that only this area is selected. And a really good way to do that is to right click on our layer and do alpha to selection. So now this entire box is selected, and we can go up to Filters, Distorts, Whirl and Pinch in order to create an effect. It's starting to kind of spin the colors around, but we have to crank the whirl way up in order to actually have the spiral that is similar to what we're looking for on this record over here. So at 6,000, this is roughly what we get. If we lower the opacity down on the spiral layer, we'll be able to see kind of how it overlaps. Everything that's off of the overlap is pretty much irrelevant. It's only this center area that matters. And I think I also had the radius set to 2 before. It might give you a better result. Really just look at these lines and figure out if the spiral is following roughly the pattern that you are looking for. To me, this is actually looking pretty good at 6002 here. I can select either of these colors to use as my path going around in circle and putting the text on the record. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. Now with this spiral, we really only want to use the inner area, the spiral that is covering the record, as anything we're going to write on. So in order to make it so that everything else is masked out, I'm going to left click on our record, or the circle you need to put the spiral on, and right click and do alpha 2 selection. So that gives us this circular selection. And if we go over to our new layer, we can right click it and do add layer mask, and selection will already be chosen here. So that's going to refer to the selection we have on the screen will serve as our initial layer mask. And by hitting OK, everything else just gets cut away. So it looks now like the spiral is perfectly overlaid with our record. So now that we have the spiral, it's possible to start creating text and having it follow along one of these spiral paths. Now it is possible to select by color and select one of these blues and reds and then make it so that your path goes around the color selection, though that usually takes a really long time and your results are going to be kind of skewed if you do it that way. So how I prefer to do it is to use the paths tool. And with the paths tool, what we're going to do is trace along one of these borders. So you can pick a space you want to start somewhere in here. And by the way, if you want the spiral to spin and start at a different area altogether, what you can do is use the rotate tool on the spiral, kind of like this, and then hit rotate. But assuming everything looks good to you, what we can do here is just to go and find a good starting spot for the text. Note, I believe that the text is going to appear below this line, so you do want to make some space between the edge of your sphere and where your text is actually going to be. So I'm going to click here, and then manually I'm going to keep clicking around as we basically copy our spiral, but into a single lined path. So obviously this is where it can get a little bit tedious, and you don't have to do every step at once. You could just put your spiral up to about here and then add a line of text, and then after you've decided that that's good, then you can continue around and around. So let's take this path we just created and actually type some text here. So what we can type in up here is green smoothies are the best. And so I pasted that in a couple times just to make extra text characters to write along that path. And this path we created might not actually be long enough yet, and that's why it's a good idea to test early. So with this path selected, left click in the paths window. If you don't have the paths window, you can open it in Windows, Dockable Dialogues, and Paths. Now we go over to the layers where we have our text, and all we need to do is right click and do text along path, which will create a new text path that we can create our final text from. So if we go in here, you can see that it's pretty accurate, but we do have a problem, which is that when it gets here, the path is finished. So these last few characters are kind of trailing, and that means that there wasn't enough path for it to continue writing. So we can undo that, and let's edit this path. So paths tool, edit, and I'll double click this path to open it back up for editing and just add a few more points in. Obviously, you can go as far around as you need to. And with the text, I'm just going to reassign it there. So text along path. And now it comes up to here with the text. So we want to go over to paths once again. And you'll notice that this is actually a path here. It's not its own layer. So in order to turn this path into something that's actually visible on a layer, we want to create a new layer here. We want to make sure that this path is selected, and we want to right click it and do path to selection. So what you should see is the dotted animated selection lines going around all of these areas. And now we can go over to layers and actually just fill these in with the paint bucket. So paint bucket, color of your choice, left click to fill it in, and we've created text all the way around from the left side to the bottom right side. If we hide the path, we can see that this text is now appearing there. So if we hide our spiral, we can see how it looks on the actual disk. So if you run into any issues like this doesn't look quite how you want it, then I would suggest you go back to the spiral creation thing and try playing around with different settings. Maybe you need to bump the numbers up a little bit more so that it spirals more times before it gets to the center. But that's generally how you would do it inside of GIMP. So let's finish this up by adding in more text and creating a longer path that spirals a couple full times. I'm going to delete this layer here, and I'm going to double click on the path, making sure I'm in edit mode here. Oh wait, that's the wrong path. It's the unnamed one. We can actually delete that text created path because we don't need that right now. And in order to finish this, of course, we also need the spiral to be visible, so we have a tracing line. And let's just keep going around here. Okay, so I think that makes a pretty good spiral path. Obviously, it's a little tedious clicking all the way around, but that's probably about the best way to get a good result. So let's go ahead and paste some text in here. And with this text, we will try to apply it along that path. Now, the longer your path is and the longer your text is, the longer the effect may take to apply. As long as you see the little processing thing, though, it should be working still. So with the unnamed path selected, that's the one I was creating, I'm going to right-click our new text and do text along path. So as you can see, I applied a little bit too much text there, and it also took a very long time for it to process. So what I might recommend is that instead of doing one spiral for the entire thing, try breaking it down into individual pieces. So you might have one spiral there, and then you create a new path, and then go around once more, do a new path, go around once more. So let me see if I can fix this up a little bit. Okay, so now that we have this path generated, I'm going to fill it in the same way we did before. So I'm going to right-click Path to Selection, go over to Layers, and create a new layer. And we will just fill this in with white. So now we can hide that path, and we can continue working on everything else that we want to show up here. So this next path that I'll create will only go around once, and that's so that when we apply the text in chunks, it can process a lot faster. So let's start from here. In pretty much exactly the same manner we were doing before. You can always adjust or undo the points. You can adjust by clicking on a point and moving it, or you can hit Ctrl-Z to undo the last created point if you need to. But as long as we follow along the border between this red and blue here, we should get a pretty good result. And we'll stop there with one full spin. So let's get some more text we can add into this path. So I will create a temporary text layer here and paste in my text. I will select the path, right-click my text, and do text along path. So in this case, it took merely about 8 seconds as opposed to 2 or 3 minutes. So you can see how fast it goes when you have less text that you're trying to apply all at once. So now with this path, let's fill it in once more by right-clicking, doing Path to Selection, Paint Bucket Tool, and we'll need to go to a new layer here, and we can left-click and fill it in with the white color. Now, as long as you have a new layer created, you could also just right-click on the path and do Fill Path with solid color, which should use the foreground color. So exactly like using the Paint Bucket tool, we're just filling in the path in a different way. And that's generally the idea. We just keep going until it's all the way around enough times. We disable all of our extra layers. And when we're done with the spiral, we can disable that too. Hide the path so that we can see how the text appears on the disk. So now we have our text spiraling, but it might not be in the exact shape and size we want. We could go back and manipulate the spiral a little bit so that when the text is initially being put on, it's a little bit closer to what we want. Another option, though, would be to manipulate the text directly when we have it all on here. And we can do that across all of these different layers by going down here and adding in a new layer group. So I'm going to call this the text layer group. And when we add these text layers onto this, we can actually manipulate them all at the same time by selecting the text layer group. And with the text layer group selected, we can hold shift down so it's moving the active layer, and we can move all of this text all at once. So I'm going to position it to about where it's even on all sides, because I think that looks a little better. And looking at it, the scale is a little off too. Maybe that's because we started with a non-perfect square. I believe that the original circle image here for the disk is actually not even on all sides. So we can scale that up. So I'm going to use the scale tool here and scale things up a bit. Also scale from the bottom as well. Just drag things around until it looks generally right, and then hit scale. So now our text is still spiraling, but maybe the positioning on everything looks a little bit better. Obviously, if you wanted to finish this whole disk, you would just add in more text before you make these final moving and scaling adjustments. But hopefully this is giving you guys a pretty accurate idea on how you can recreate an effect like this, where you have text going around in a spiral. Clearly it's a little bit tedious and there's a little bit of trial and error, but I hope this tutorial has helped you guys to get a good grasp on the basics. So I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in my future GIMP content.